I'm hoping you know what that was. I'm pretty sure you're a millennial, so you've probably seen the videos. If not, then I'm sorry. I decided to do this as a video instead of a podcast because I figured I might as well use some of my skills to do this to the best of my ability and make it a little more, visually interesting. So before I start, I'm going to be using some citations from our readings to sort of set the foundation for what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So I'm going to be throwing at you some quotes from Althusser in his reading that he wrote, Ideology Interpolates Individuals as Subjects. And in that he explains what he means by the words interpellation and hailing. And so he says, the category of the subject is only constitutive of all ideology insofar as all ideology has the function which defines it of constituting concrete individuals as subjects. So basically what he's saying is that we have the ability to call people out and name them as something other than just themselves. And that's on page 84. And then he goes further and kind of explains it in a different way on page 85 by saying all ideology hails or interpolates concrete individuals as concrete subjects. So like I said, seeing someone on the street, like a police officer, seeing someone saying, hey you, stop, the police officer is interpolating that pedestrian as perhaps potentially a suspect in a crime. I'm gonna be doing the rest of this video somewhere else. My apartment's kinda loud even though I asked them to be quiet. Men being loud. I'm interpolating that as men, interpolating them as being kind of inconsiderate. Alright, we're in our new location where hopefully it'll be a little bit more quiet. So as I was kind of talking about earlier with Althusser and his theory behind interpolation and hailing, it's this process through which we kind of name people to be within specific identities. So for instance, as a white person, I am my own individual until perhaps I'm called out as that identity as a white man. Before I jump into kind of the three identities that I'm going to be talking about in terms of hailing and interpolation, I thought that it would be smart to also cite some other readings and things that we've learned about in terms of where we get our knowledge. The reading that came to me immediately off the top of my head was the one by Foucault called, I believe, Discourse and Power. On page 130 of that reading, he states that discourses produce knowledge, and knowledge is always a weapon of power. And then he goes further to say that power produces reality, and through our discourses, we produce the truths that we live by. An example of a reality that we have created through our discourses was discussed in the reading The Ideology of Racism, Its Historical Emergence, in which the author's story talks about Orientalism as a reality that we have created through our discourses. And the discourses that we have kind of perpetuated about the East and how it's kind of primitive and not as advanced as the West, and has the discourses have shaped the West to be the superior half of the world, and that the East looks up to the West for guidance, and overall just depicts the East, especially like Asian countries, to be lower class than countries from the West. So the first identity that I'm going to be talking about is my identity as a boy. And this is something that I guess I've kind of like struggled a little bit with growing up, in terms of like, what does it mean to be a boy or like a man, or like what kind of things do I have to do to like fit in? And I guess I haven't really thought about it, but there are a lot of ways in which I was kind of othered, I guess, in terms of like how I acted in relation to other boys my age. One of the earliest examples that I can remember of, I guess, being interpellated as a man or a boy was in like, I don't know, 2nd or 3rd grade, and I was just sitting at my desk and I was crossing my legs, and another boy in the class said, "Hey, don't do that, boys don't cross their legs." And I remember it bothering me, and I remember talking to my family members about it, like I don't understand, like why does me crossing my legs mean that I'm doing something that's uncharacteristic of a man? And to this day, like I still think about it sometimes when I cross my legs. I think about that like specific moment when I was told that doing so made me not a man. And then even just, you know, like even smaller things, like growing up, my family always cutting my hair to be short. The clothes that they picked out for me to wear were very masculine looking. Just all these things to fit me into these set of expectations of how an American boy presents himself, and sort of setting the standard for me for like what my style is today, I guess. Even when I'm like buying clothes for myself and I'm thinking, oh, like this would be kind of cool, but I'm like, but I mean, it's kind of on the feminine side, like I don't know if I could pull that off. It's like these messages in my head, these discourses that I had with family and peers growing up that have kind of like set this expectation in my head of what I'm supposed to do to be able to like be accepted in society as a man. Thinking about race in particular and the ways that I've been interpolated as, you know, not only white but a white man is a little harder for me to think about. And of course I recognize that that's my privilege, that as a white man I don't have to think about the color of my skin very often. I think since I've come to college, especially, these conversations happen a lot more, and we talk about the different ways that the color of my skin privileges me in ways that it doesn't for people of color. And so I think like examples of that, and those discussions that we've had in classrooms have, you know, interpolated me, have hailed me as like a white man, and it comes with this responsibility of educating myself and being aware of how my presence affects those around me, and how I have benefited from my privilege, and you know, kind of how, even though like I know in these discussions like I'm not being called out like specifically as like a white person, but in terms of like whiteness as a structural institution, and how, you know, it's like kind of, you know, my responsibility and my white peers to be allies for people of color, and to help tear down these honestly racist institutions that have been a part of this country since its origin. In terms of my sexuality, I think that I can think of a lot of examples in which I've been interpolated as a queer man. My first week on campus, I was in a residence hall, and I was just sitting around talking with people, and this one guy like walks into the lobby area, and he just like yells out like, "What's up, faggot?" And I immediately froze, and I like kind of like turned and saw that he was talking to like one of his buddies, and like he didn't use it to be like a derogatory term. He was just like messing around talking to his friend. But in that moment, like it being my first week on campus, I realized like, okay, like I am going to be dealing with situations in which I'm going to be othered, and that like people like not that they know that about me, but like there are going to be conversations where I'm going to feel excluded, or things are going to be said that I find offensive. And in that moment, like I found myself being kind of hailed like as like a queer man on campus, surrounded by a group of people who like fit into that heteronormative space, and that I would be finding myself in awkward situations from time to time. Another recent example of this was when I was working on the #ICommit movement project with some of my peers in the early developments, and even like later on in the discussions we were having about masculinity and how it manifests on campus and just in our society in general. A lot of our conversations were very heteronormative, and it was kind of up to me to be the one to be, hey guys, like, you know, I think we should be remembering like these sort of things happen, or like masculinity is very toxic a lot of times for queer communities, and so like in that way I kind of was like interpolated like as like the queer spokesperson for this group, and it kind of got exhausting, you know, like I didn't want to have to be the one to constantly be like, well, you should be thinking about these people, or like we should be framing this conversation this way because it's kind of isolating. And I hated being that person that constantly had to speak up. But I mean, I think that happens in every space, you know. I'm not a person of color, but people of color constantly have to be the ones to speak up, to point out things that are wrong, or I guess just be the bearer of information about issues regarding people of color, or any identity, you know, that's not part of the dominant ideology, is constantly forced to be the spokesperson. And that's something that we've talked about in class, you know. People whose identities don't fit the dominant ideology typically don't get to just be themselves, you know, they have to be the spokesperson for their entire identity, which isn't true for straight white males. You know, they get to just be their own individual, and other identities don't get to just be themselves. They have to, as I said, be this sort of spokesperson for an entire group of people. All right, I know that I'm already running over on time, but I wanted to bring up one more example of a kind of interpellation in terms of my identity as a queer man, and it relates directly to one of the readings that we did called Uno Momento, por favor. Microaggressions, Marginality, and Oppression. That was written by Durald Sue. And in this reading, he kind of sets apart, or he brings up 3 different forms of microaggressions. And on page 25, he discusses the version of microaggressions that he calls microinvalidations. These are direct attacks that deny the experiential realities of socially devalued groups, and they do this by excluding, negating, and nullifying the psychological thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and experiences of the target group. These conversations come up a lot, kind of phrase some form of like, oh, did you know that Billy is dating Sandra? And then someone will say something like, oh, like I thought Ben was gay. Kind of really nullifying the existence of bisexuality, which is something that I find very personal, because I consider myself to be bisexual, and so I identify as bisexual, and so I'm very sensitive to bi erasure, and that's seen a lot in media where like characters are specifically like created to be either heterosexual or homosexual, and there's very little room for anything else, or like an identity that doesn't fit within that binary. And so like those kind of like micro invalidations happen a lot, and I found myself saying things similar to that, and I find it to be very problematic, and it's something that I'm constantly working to get myself out of thinking that way, because again, it is kind of a discourse that we've created through our society that sexuality is a binary, and if people are even willing to, you know, accept homosexuality, usually it's within that binary of homosexuality, heterosexuality, and there's no existence of anything in between. Alright, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Again, I apologize for this being a little long. I tried my best with this, I really did. I have to be honest, I really wanted to make a good video, but I'm kind of running on like 2.5 brain cells at this point. And I've been editing this as I've been going, and I look busted. Dr. Mirage Lloyd, I look so tired. But I love this class. It's my favorite class to go to, and I really have enjoyed being in this class and the things that we've been discussing and learning about, and I hope that you enjoy this video. I don't know, I just thought it'd be like sad to like end it like on me making a sad face, so I hope this video makes you laugh.